My first kind of question for you, just to get the ball rolling, is for you to introduce yourself, if that's all right.
Well, my name is Malte Becker. I am since many years in the Brussels arena, starting originally many years ago in the area of cement industry, then moving afterwards into household appliances, and meanwhile also covering a bit other sectors. But let's say the main focus all over the last years was really the chemical legislation related to downstream users, so the end producers of final articles. And in that respect, what we were going to talk today, RoHS is certainly one of the important legislative requirements to look at.
Our first question for you today is, from what I'm aware, RoHS can sometimes be mistaken for REACH. And I was wondering if it would be possible for you to explain what products are actually covered by RoHS, maybe giving some examples, if that's okay. And then, if you can, give a short comparison of RoHS compared to REACH.
Too complicated. In principle, RoHS is covering any electric and electronic equipment. And this equipment is defined in RoHS. I'm just reading it out now because it's relevant to bear in mind. It's equipment which is dependent on electric currents or electromagnetic fields in order to work properly, and equipment for the generation, transfer, and measurement of such currents and fields, and designed for use with a voltage rating not exceeding 1,000 volts for alternating current and 1,500 volts for direct current. So this is the basic definition, which is strictly really limiting the scope to these electric equipments. And with the amendment and the revision of RoHS in 2011, so-called now RoHS 2, we have since then the open scope applicable, which means in principle any appliances which are meeting these definitions, as I mentioned, are falling under the RoHS scope. However, there are some exemptions. I should mention them, not to leave that out, but they are very specific. And I think for this audience, we might expect here most likely not really relevant. We're talking about military purposes. We are talking about design to be sent into space, large-scale stationary industrial tools, large-scale fixed installations, implantable medical devices, or pipe organs, for instance. So there are a very limited amount of exemptions.
Just from there, a kind of second question to you there, again, thank you for that, is which situations are RoHS legally required?
Okay, we have an annex which is giving some indicative examples of which kind of sectors are included there. This is large and small household appliances. This is toys. This is lighting instruments. So there's a bunch of electric equipment you can imagine which is falling under the scope.
Yeah, so very broad. Okay, thank you. That's good to know. So if it's possible, could you share with us any, what is the latest update with RoHS? And to further on that, like, how would you say a lot of companies are affected by it? If you could share an example as well.
Before that, probably you were mentioning the relation to REACH before. Probably, if you allow, just make some more words on that, if that's okay.
Oh yes, of course. Oh yeah, my apologies. Yeah. Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. So I think obviously, as indicated here, RoHS is a very specific legislation, whereas REACH is generic. That's why. And since this is the case, RoHS can also be much more specific in terms of what kind of requirements are demanded. And the basic major differences is that we have in RoHS this distinct exemption process, which is allowing requesting for exemptions for applications of the banned substances where it is technically not feasible to substitute them. One could argue this is a bit similar to the RoHS authorization, but I think the processes are very different. So I think there is a distinct distinction here. In addition to that, the RoHS restrictions which apply, they are applying in general on homogeneous material, which is very, very different from REACH, where we're talking about articles. However, also here it needs to be mentioned that in a REACH article with the latest judgment of the Court of Justice on substance in articles, the so-called once an article, always an article ruling, there, I believe, the definition of article and homogeneous material may diverge to a certain extent. It will not be identical. You can have, for instance, a multi-layer metal part. And in RoHS, these multi-layers would be the individual homogeneous layers, which would be relevant for the requirements. However, in REACH, it would be most likely the complete part, for instance. To your question about the changes, I indicated already the keywords, exemptions and restrictions. So basically there can happen changes in RoHS unless it is not a complete revision where a lot of things are changing in addition to that. We are talking about the requirement to meet the substance bans as well as to meet, to apply for exemptions. Exemptions are granted by the Commission in a constant level. And this is also the purpose of the legislation, that you have always to get into more granularity to apply for an application so that by the time more and more applications which are not technically necessary anymore are phased out. So this is a process which is constantly happening. And so this is not a change which is extremely drastic and can be followed by the relevant audience, I think, relatively easy. Other more drastic changes would be related to the imposition of additional bans, as happened in 2015 when 4 plasticides were added on Annex 2 of RoHS. Here, I think much more changes are needed because a manufacturer of an electronic equipment has to go through his own complete supply chain to ensure that the substance ban is applied. So these are the 2 main issues in terms of changes. And in the moment, there is a wave of exemptions waited to be granted. So this is happening recently. And we also have probably we come to that at a later stage, RoHS revision, which has started already. So there is also changes to be expected.
Fantastic, thank you. It's good to know that something, as you said, it's constantly in flux. Kind of fourth question to you, just 5 questions today, would be how can RoHS testing, in your opinion, help manufacturers and traders?
We have the restrictions on RoHS in terms of substance bans.
Yeah.
Another requirement in RoHS is to prove compliance via documentation of compliance, which is according to the CE marking requirements. And there are various options to prove compliance, but testing is certainly the most direct and less ambiguous one, because once you have a test, it is very clear this appliance is in compliance or is in fail. However, here it should be noted that it would be just a spot check. So you will never have a complete picture. So you would have to have some kind of regular testing. And this will also depend, and each manufacturer has to decide that, on the criticality of the component you're looking at, as well as the criticality of the supplier. And if you have a combination of a critical supplier and a critical component, then you may need more drastic measures to prove compliance than everything would be easygoing. For instance, a wood shelf on some kind of electric appliance is certainly not risky. So you would not need necessarily testing for that. You can use your common sense. But if you have a electronic component, normally including cadmium, then you will certainly have to look at that in a different manner.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you. As you said, it does make sense that something having that stamp of approval, making sure it is or it isn't, is really important.
Yes, absolutely.
So, kind of final question I'm gonna place to you, and it's about Brexit. How would Brexit, in your opinion, affect the regulations of RoHS 2 and the CE marking directive? And to follow up on that, sorry, how can a company stay updated with these changes?
The EU RoHS is independently from what is happening in the UK from now on. We had this transition period after the Brexit for this last half a year. And in the moment, I think there is still convergence between the two laws as I followed it. But this must not stay for the future. As soon as, for instance, we have new exemptions, new wordings of exemptions granted, new restrictions, the questions will be whether the UK is following one-to-one or is deciding differently. So here I think it needs professional monitoring and just to understand what's going on. And there are the websites of the UK authority, which I would recommend really to go through regularly and see what is changing. The websites are quite good, I have to say. And so you have to keep up on the developments. It's nothing else I can say, unfortunately. And due to the Brexit, a lot of things are getting more uncertain by the time.
So that's fantastic. That's so great. Those are all the questions we have for you today. However, actually, what I'd like to ask you is there anything kind of your thoughts on RoHS or anything that you'd potentially like to share? Some little nuggets of information or your thoughts and opinion?
Probably in terms of update, I indicated already the recent RoHS review, which has started with a roadmap for stakeholder consultation, which is closed now. So we will see a lot of areas where there will be a political battleground in terms of shall the precautionary principle be applied more distinct, or will it remain as it is in the moment as more risk-based approach assessment of restrictions? This will be the major difficulties, which will then certainly lead to very different pictures in the future in terms of easiness to request and to grant or to apply additional restrictions. We will have a debate in terms of acceleration improvement of the exemption process, which will hopefully lead to less delays as we've seen them in the moment. And we will have discussions about methodologies. How will the exemption process look like? How can it be improved, and how can it be really documented properly, which is not the case in the moment, as well as the methodology for RoHS restrictions. So I think this is the main two large areas where I see a lot of discussions happening. In terms of outlook, which has already been, let's say, not decided, but pre-recommended by consultants, there are two substances which are relatively likely to be included in the next restrictions. This is MCCPs as well as TBBPA. So we are talking about two brominated chlorinated flame retardants, which will fall then in the restriction scope most likely. Enforcement activities of members might be probably something which will also be looked at more in detail in the new revision. So there will be also probably more clear requests on member states to ensure that enforcement is really happening, which is important to fight pre-riders. Yeah, I think this would be in brief what I do expect from the revision.
Thank you, Mr. Becker. It's been fantastic having you. That's all we have time for today. Again, thank you for your time and your insight, and we would love to have you again sometime.
It was a pleasure being of assistance, and yeah, looking forward to that. Thank you very much, and have a good day.